It was supposed to be a peaceful night, just like any other. The kind of night where you feel safe in your home, surrounded by your loved ones. My daughter, who had always been my source of strength and light, was tucked in bed, sound asleep, unaware of the terror that was about to unfold. But that night, everything changed. In a moment that I will never forget, Karen, someone I once trusted, broke into our home. My heart still races when I think about it. She was always unpredictable, but never in my wildest dreams did I imagine this. She shot my disabled daughter while she was sleeping. Yes, you heard that right. My helpless, defenseless little girl, who had done nothing but exist in this world, became the target of a senseless act of violence. Why? Why did Karen do this? What could possibly drive someone to such an unimaginable act? This wasn't just a home invasion. This was personal. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. The twists, the secrets, and the truth that came to light after that night, they will leave you stunned. You won't believe the lengths to which Karen went and the shocking revelations that followed. Stay with me, because this story isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning. What happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about human nature, trust, and betrayal. This is the story of how one night my entire world turned upside down. My daughter, Emily, is the light of my life. Born with a disability that affects her mobility, she faces daily challenges that many people wouldn't understand unless they've experienced them firsthand. But what makes her truly remarkable is her spirit. Despite her struggles, Emily approaches life with an unmatched resilience that leaves everyone who meets her in awe. From the moment she wakes up to the moment she falls asleep, there's this infectious sense of joy and determination that radiates from her, no matter what obstacles come her way. She may need assistance with basic tasks like getting dressed or moving around, but her heart is full of love and her mind is as sharp as anyone's. I remember one moment vividly. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we were sitting in the living room, Emily with her favorite book, and I was working nearby. She turned to me and, with a grin, asked if she could help me with my work. Her voice, though soft, was full of enthusiasm. She always wanted to contribute, to be a part of everything, even when it was difficult for her. That's Emily. She never lets her disability define her. She lets her heart define who she is. And that's the bond we share, the bond of unconditional love and support, of me doing everything I can to make her world as bright and beautiful as it should be. Every day with Emily is a reminder of the preciousness of life. There's no such thing as a typical day for us, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I've watched her grow into a person who doesn't shy away from challenges, no matter how hard they might seem. She's not just my daughter. She's my hero, teaching me every day about strength, courage, and the power of love. But as much as I wanted to protect her from the world, there were always people who would cross her path. One such person was Karen. At first, Karen seemed like an ordinary woman, friendly, approachable, and like anyone else, someone who you could have a casual conversation with over a cup of coffee. She had been a neighbor for a while, and in the beginning, she was helpful, almost too helpful. She offered to help me run errands, insisted on bringing over meals during rough times, and even started taking Emily out for walks when I couldn't. At first, it all seemed so genuine. It felt like I could trust her. She was a friend. But as the months passed, something started to shift. Karen's behavior became more erratic. She would drop by unannounced, sometimes at late hours, with no explanation as to why. It was always under the guise of checking in, but I began to notice the subtle shifts in her demeanor. The way she would look at me with an almost calculating gaze, or how she seemed to be overly critical of Emily's condition. What started as kindness slowly turned into something else. The first major warning sign came when Karen made a comment about Emily's disability, something she would later brush off as a joke. But the words lingered in my mind. It must be so exhausting for you, always having to deal with her. It wasn't the kind of remark you make about someone's child. It fell off. But I pushed it aside, thinking maybe I was overthinking things. But with each passing visit, the comments became more pointed, more cruel. Karen started to display strange behavior, like showing up at times when Emily and I were alone, but then acting surprised when she was caught peeking through our windows. At one point, she even started to criticize how I was caring for Emily, offering unsolicited advice that didn't sit right with me. Then came the jealousy. It was subtle at first, little things like the way she'd comment on the bond Emily and I shared. "It must be nice to be so close to your daughter," she would say, her voice thick with envy. I noticed she started to distance herself from me, showing a strange resentment that I couldn't quite understand. At times, she would lash out at people around her, and I began to wonder if there was more to her emotions than just the usual frustrations of life. Was there something darker lurking beneath the surface? The shift in Karen's behavior was so gradual that it was almost impossible to pinpoint the exact moment when she crossed the line from friend to threat. But one thing was clear: Karen's actions were no longer driven by kindness or concern. The jealousy, the anger, the subtle threats, they all began to build up until one night, she did the unthinkable. It was in those final weeks before the tragedy that I realized how dangerous Karen had become. But by then it was too late. The person who had once been a trusted friend had turned into someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of the unimaginable. The days leading up to that tragic night felt almost like the calm before the storm. But looking back, there were subtle signs that I either ignored or brushed off, things that now seem so obvious in hindsight. Karen's visits became more frequent and more unpredictable. She would show up at our doorstep uninvited, often at odd hours. At first, I assumed it was just her way of showing care, but as time went on, I realized there was something different about her. One afternoon, she appeared just as I was helping Emily with her homework. She didn't knock, just opened the door and stepped inside. There was no apology, no excuse. She simply walked in as if she had a right to be there, interrupting our peaceful moment. Her presence felt heavy, almost intrusive. As she stood in the doorway, she stared at Emily, who was sitting at the table, quietly working through her assignment. "She's doing well, I see," Karen remarked with a strange edge to her voice. I nodded, not thinking much of it at the time. But then Karen added, "It must be hard, though, doesn't it? Caring for her all the time? She can't do much, can she?" The way she phrased it, cold, calculating, sent a chill down my spine. It was as if she was making a subtle jab, questioning my abilities as a mother, as if she had some right to pass judgment on my daughter. Her words hung in the air, making me uneasy, but I forced myself to smile and change the subject. That evening, I found myself feeling unsettled. Something about Karen's visit lingered in my mind like a cloud I couldn't shake off. But I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, she had been a good friend once. Still, there was a knot in my stomach that refused to loosen. I tried to focus on Emily, who was in her room, reading a book before bed. I kissed her goodnight, tucked her in, and whispered that I loved her. But even then, there was something off. The house felt too quiet, too still. I told myself it was just the exhaustion of the day settling in, but the silence seemed unnatural. As I moved about, I kept glancing at the clock, watching the minutes tick by. The house creaked and groaned as if it, too, was unsettled. Later that evening, as I lay in bed beside Emily, the unease only deepened. The usual sounds of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the rustling of leaves outside, seemed louder than usual, as if the world had been magnified. I tried to sleep, tried to close my eyes and ignore the feeling that something was wrong. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the sensation that we weren't alone. At around 2 a.m., a strange noise jolted me awake. It was faint at first, almost like a soft thud coming from the living room. I froze, listening. The noise repeated itself, a scraping sound, followed by another thud. My heart began to race. My first thought was that it was the wind, maybe something outside had fallen over. But then it came again, louder this time, unmistakable in its intent. I felt the cold sweat on my forehead as I carefully slid out of bed, trying not to wake Emily. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone, but I didn't want to call the police yet. It could be nothing, I told myself. But as the noise grew louder, more persistent, I realized that it wasn't the wind or something trivial. Someone was inside the house. I crept quietly toward the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. The sounds had stopped, but the tension in the air was unbearable. Every step felt like an eternity, and the silence that followed made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. As I neared the hallway, I thought I saw a shadow move near the kitchen, but when I looked, there was nothing. I backed up slowly, my instinct screaming at me to be cautious. But then, just as I turned to head back to Emily, the front door creaked. It wasn't the sound of it opening, it was the sound of it being forced open, slowly, almost deliberately. The hairs on my neck stood up straight as I realized someone was entering the house. I couldn't move. It was at that moment that I felt the full weight of the situation. My body froze in fear. My mind screamed at me to go back to Emily's room, to lock the door, to protect her. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed by the fear of what might be coming next. Then the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed through the hall, closer and closer, getting louder. I turned to rush to Emily, but before I could move, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Karen. For a moment, I stood there in disbelief. Karen? How could it be her? Why would she do this? I didn't have the answers, only a sense of growing horror. Don't scream, she whispered, her voice cold and strange. It's too late for that now. Before I could react, before I could even understand what was happening, the next thing I heard was a gunshot. The deafening sound shattered the night. And then everything changed. I rushed to Emily's room, but it was too late. Karen had already done the unthinkable. My daughter, my beautiful, innocent daughter, was lying there, her life forever altered in a way I couldn't even comprehend. The pain in my chest was suffocating, the rage, the confusion, it all collided in that one terrible moment. This wasn't just a break-in. This was no random attack. This was personal, and it was a nightmare I couldn't escape. It started with an almost imperceptible noise, a soft creak, barely audible over the quiet hum of the house. I had been drifting in and out of sleep, my mind still racing with the unsettling feeling that had been building all evening. That feeling, the one you get when you know something isn't right, but can't put your finger on it, had only grown stronger as the night wore on. But I had tried to dismiss it. It was late. Emily was sound asleep beside me, the peaceful rise and fall of her chest lulling me into a false sense of calm. I was exhausted, desperate to sleep, to forget about the worries that had been clouding my mind for days. But that creak, that small, delicate sound, broke through the silence. It was enough to jolt me awake. I froze, straining my ears, trying to decipher the sound, trying to convince myself that it was just the house settling. But then it came again, a little louder this time, the creak of the front door, and then footsteps, the unmistakable sound of someone walking across the floor, slow and deliberate, with a weight to each step that sent a chill down my spine. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead as panic began to creep into my veins. My mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Was it a burglar? A stranger? My heart was pounding in my chest, each beat sounding louder than the last. The house felt suddenly too big, too empty. It felt as though the walls were closing in, suffocating me with their silence. I sat up in bed, trying to make sense of the sounds, trying to gather the strength to act. The house was so still, except for the creaks of the floorboards, and yet it felt as if every sound was magnified. I glanced over at Emily, still asleep, completely unaware of the danger approaching. Her body was curled beneath the covers, her face peaceful, innocent. I wanted to protect her, to shield her from whatever was coming, but my body wouldn't move. I was paralyzed by fear, unable to make a single decision. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Someone was definitely inside the house, moving with purpose. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that whoever it was, they were coming toward us. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, and I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The terror was overwhelming. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the screen, trying to dial 911. But as soon as I pressed the button, a door slammed somewhere in the house and my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a burglar. This was deliberate. Suddenly, I heard a voice, a low whisper that sent a surge of fear straight through me. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. "It's time." I recognized the voice. It was Karen. My blood ran cold. I couldn't move. My thoughts were a blur of disbelief, anger, and confusion. Why was Karen in my house? Why was she doing this? What had happened to the woman I once considered a friend? I had no answers. Only this sickening realization that the woman who had once been so kind and helpful had become something else, something unrecognizable. But before I could process it any further, the sound of a door opening violently shattered the stillness of the house. I rushed to the doorway of Emily's room, my legs shaking beneath me. The cold air from the hallway hit my skin, sending a chill through my bones. I barely had time to react before I saw her. Karen, standing in the doorway of Emily's room. Her face was contorted with something between rage and satisfaction, her eyes wild, almost unhinged. She was holding something in her hands, and my stomach dropped as I realized what it was. A gun. Everything happened in a blur of panic. I tried to move, tried to scream, but the words caught in my throat. Time slowed as I saw Karen raise the gun toward Emily's bed, her expression dark and cold. Emily, still asleep, unaware of the danger that loomed over her, had no chance to react. The sound of the gunshot was deafening. It echoed in my ears, ringing through my skull like 1,000 bells. The blast shattered the night, tearing through the fragile calm that had once existed in my home. Emily didn't even flinch. She simply stopped moving. I froze, unable to comprehend what had just happened. My mind was a jumbled mess of horror and disbelief. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was watch as Karen stood there, the gun still in her hand, her expression cold and unfeeling. Then, in an instant, reality came crashing back. My instincts took over. I rushed into Emily's room, my legs finally responding to the terror that was consuming me. I dropped to my knees beside her, my hands trembling as I checked for a pulse. Her skin was cold, too cold. I screamed her name, desperate, frantic, but she didn't respond. The room was spinning around me. I could hear my own heart thundering in my chest, drowning out all other sounds. I screamed for help, but no one could hear me. The house was too silent now, too still. There was only me and Emily and Karen standing in the doorway, watching us with a calmness that made my blood run cold. "Why?" I choked out, my voice barely a whisper. "Why did you do this?" Karen didn't answer. She simply turned, walking out of the room as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just destroyed my world. I didn't know how long I sat there, holding Emily's lifeless body, begging for a miracle that I knew would never come. My mind couldn't process what had just unfolded. How had it all come to this? How had the woman I once trusted become the source of such unspeakable pain? The gunshot had shattered everything, and I was left alone with the wreckage of my life, trying to make sense of a tragedy that I would never be able to understand. The moment the gunshot rang out, everything around me seemed to fade into the background. Time itself felt suspended, as though the world was holding its breath, waiting for something, anything, to make sense of what had just happened. The air was thick with the kind of silence that only follows a life-shattering event. My mind raced, but the shock kept me rooted to the spot, unable to process the horror that had just unfolded before me. I don't remember how long I stood there, staring at Emily's still body, but it felt like hours. Every part of me was screaming, urging me to move, to act, to do something, but my body was paralyzed. The room, once filled with warmth and comfort, was now a nightmare, a cold, suffocating prison. It was like I was watching everything from a distance, as if the reality of it couldn't possibly be mine. I forced myself to move, my legs shaking with every step. The first thing I did was check for a pulse, my fingers trembling against Emily's neck. I pressed harder, willing myself to feel something, anything that would tell me she was still alive. But there was nothing. No warmth. No flutter of life. The crushing realization hit me like a freight train. My daughter, the light of my life, was gone. My hands were covered in cold sweat, my breathing erratic. I wanted to scream, to shout, to wake up from the nightmare that had just become my reality. But no sound came out. The only noise in the room was the frantic thudding of my heart, beating against my chest in a desperate attempt to stay calm. I felt the tears well up, but I couldn't cry. My body refused to acknowledge what my mind couldn't understand. How could this be real? Why would someone do this to her? Why Karen? And then, just like that, the shock shifted into a primal surge of anger. How dare she? How dare Karen? Someone I trusted, someone I thought was a friend, do this to my daughter. It felt like the earth had shifted beneath my feet and the foundation of everything I knew had cracked wide open. The woman who had once shown kindness and offered support had turned into a cold, heartless killer. The betrayal stung deeper than any physical wound. I shook my head in disbelief. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't supposed to happen. But the evidence was there. The blood, the gun, the lifeless body of my daughter lying in front of me. There was no escaping it. The world had turned upside down, and there was no way back. I snapped out of my daze when I realized that I had to act. The first thing I did was grab my phone from the bedside table, my hand still trembling so badly that I nearly dropped it. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I dialed 911. The operator's voice was a distant sound in my ear, like I was in a tunnel, but I had to keep it together. "Please help me," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Someone broke into my house. They shot my daughter. She's not breathing. Please, you have to help us." I could barely finish the sentence, and I choked on the words. I was begging. I was pleading. But I knew, deep down, that it was too late. The operator asked me questions I couldn't answer. Where was I? Was my daughter still breathing? Was the shooter still there? My mind was a blur, and all I could think about was Emily, my sweet, innocent girl, lying motionless in front of me. But the call had to go on. The operator was trying to guide me, to keep me calm, but I was beyond calm. I was overwhelmed. I was drowning in a sea of panic and fear. I couldn't make sense of anything. The logical part of my mind wanted to believe that the police would arrive in time to save her, but the truth was already setting in. The situation was beyond my control. I heard the operator's voice again, trying to pull me out of my spiral. "Ma'am, help is on the way. I need you to stay on the line with me. Can you give me more details?" I was still holding Emily, cradling her body, as if by some miracle I could breathe life back into her. "Please don't leave me. Please wake up." My mind repeated the same desperate plea over and over again, but my reality remained unchanged. I could feel the heaviness in my chest, the weight of the world pressing down on me. I had no idea where Karen had gone, no idea what she was doing, but I knew one thing: she was still out there. I could hear the echoes of her footsteps in my mind, the coldness in her voice as she'd raised the gun. What was she thinking? Why had she chosen to attack us, especially my daughter? Was it something I missed? Some subtle warning that I should have seen? Every moment I had spent with her now seemed like a lie, every interaction a falsehood. I wanted to find her, to confront her, to demand answers. But even as I thought that, a cold realization settled over me. She was the one who had just taken my daughter's life. What could I possibly say to her? What could any words do to explain or understand such cruelty? The anger flared again, hot and vicious. But it was quickly replaced by the paralyzing grief that had begun to consume me. The waiting was unbearable. The police were on their way, but every second felt like an eternity. It was as if the world had stopped moving, as though I was trapped in a nightmare with no escape. My mind kept playing over the events of the night, the sudden shift in Karen's behavior, the way she had slipped into our lives and then, with no warning, destroyed everything we had built. I stayed by Emily's side, my arms around her, hoping that somehow, some way, she would wake up. But deep down, I knew the truth. It was too late. She was gone, and there was nothing I could do to bring her back. I had failed her. The sirens outside were growing louder, signaling the arrival of help. But I felt no relief. The truth had already sunk in. The police would come, they would ask questions, and the investigation would begin. But none of that mattered. My daughter was gone, and no amount of justice would bring her back. The sound of sirens filled the night air, cutting through the fog of disbelief that had enveloped my mind. I had been sitting in the living room, still in shock, holding Emily's hand when the door burst open and law enforcement flooded in. It felt like a dream, a nightmare I couldn't escape. I stood up, my body moving on autopilot as a group of officers quickly moved past me, heading toward the scene of the crime. "Ma'am, are you the homeowner?" One of the officers asked, his voice calm but firm. I nodded, unable to speak, my throat too tight. The reality of the situation was crashing down around me, and I couldn't process what was happening. It felt as though I was watching from a distance, my body on autopilot while my mind was still trying to wrap itself around the horror of it all. The officers carefully examined the scene, their actions precise and professional. One of them took out a notepad and began to ask me questions. My answers were disjointed, half-formed, and lacking clarity. My brain was in chaos, unable to focus. I could only remember flashes, Karen, the gunshot, the look in her eyes, and those flashes were enough to drive the weight of my grief even deeper. The first few hours were a blur. I was interviewed repeatedly, trying to piece together what had happened. They asked me about Karen, who she was, why she was in my house, what kind of relationship we had. I felt like I was betraying a friend, but the truth had to come out. I had to tell them everything. At first, it was hard to make sense of Karen's actions. She had been a trusted friend, someone I thought I could rely on. But as the officers dug deeper, they uncovered a trail of disturbing behavior, things that, in hindsight, should have been red flags. Karen had become increasingly isolated in the months leading up to the shooting. She had started to withdraw from other friends and acquaintances, becoming more obsessed with Emily and me. Officers spoke to neighbors who described Karen as being obsessive about the well-being of Emily, but in a way that felt off. She had insisted on taking Emily out for walks regularly, and she often dropped by uninvited. Neighbors also reported that Karen had become fixated on our family, constantly showing up, wanting to know the details of our lives. Some even mentioned that she had grown hostile toward anyone who questioned her intentions or tried to engage with us in a meaningful way. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that Karen's obsession with Emily had taken a dark turn. It was as if she couldn't handle seeing the bond that Emily and I shared, a bond that was, to her, something unattainable. One of the officers pointed out something that I hadn't realized before. Karen had been at the house more than anyone else in the months leading up to the attack. She had seen how close Emily and I were, how we relied on each other, and how happy we made each other despite the challenges we faced. It became evident that Karen had harbored some kind of deep-seated resentment, one that she had never voiced but had simmered beneath the surface, growing more intense each day. The police interviewed other people from Karen's life, colleagues, past friends, even family members. They uncovered disturbing details from her past, things that painted a picture of someone who was capable of extreme actions, someone who had always struggled with jealousy, manipulation, and an inability to handle rejection. There were whispers of a past abusive relationship, a series of failed friendships, and most shockingly, reports of Karen having harbored violent fantasies in the past. She had spoken to others about how she wished she could take control of certain situations, a sentiment that had always been brushed off as harmless venting. But now, those words felt chilling, knowing what she was capable of. The investigation revealed that Karen's motive was not a sudden, unprovoked act of violence, but rather the result of years of simmering rage and resentment. Her obsession with Emily and me, combined with her inability to process her own emotions, led her to lash out in the most horrific way possible. She had convinced herself that if she couldn't have the kind of love and support Emily and I shared, no one else could. A crucial piece of evidence came from Karen's journals. The investigators uncovered notebooks filled with obsessive thoughts, scribbled rants about how perfect our family seemed and how she could never measure up. She had written about feeling rejected and invisible, even though she had been the one who chose to isolate herself. She had romanticized the idea of taking control of Emily's life, of somehow inserting herself into our dynamic. She believed that by destroying the bond we had, she would create an opening for herself to be the center of attention, to finally have the connection she so desperately craved. But what was most chilling was how she had rationalized her actions. In one of her final entries, she wrote, "She'll never understand how much I've done for her, how much I've given. But if she can't see it, then I'll make her see. I'll make her pay for what she's taken from me." It was clear now that this wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a calculated move, fueled by jealousy, obsession, and an overwhelming need for control. Karen had tried to justify it in her mind, believing that taking Emily's life would somehow make her a part of the family, or, at the very least, get rid of what she saw as the competition. The revelations about Karen's past, combined with the interviews from those who had known her, painted a picture of a woman who was emotionally unstable and at times dangerous. But there were no clear warning signs that would have tipped anyone off to the severity of her thoughts. Karen was good at hiding her true feelings, presenting a facade of kindness and concern. But beneath that surface, she was unwell. As the investigation unfolded, the shocking truth emerged. Karen had been hiding in plain sight, slowly losing herself to her own destructive impulses. The woman I had once trusted, the one I had considered friend, had been living a double life, hiding her dangerous obsession behind a mask of friendliness. She had been planning this for months, and I had no idea. The revelation left me numb. It wasn't just the shock of losing Emily that consumed me, it was the betrayal, the realization that someone so close to us could harbor such hatred and jealousy. Karen's actions were the culmination of a series of broken relationships, psychological issues, and a deeply troubled mind. But no matter how much I tried to understand it, I could never make sense of why she had chosen to take my daughter's life. The investigation didn't bring my daughter back. It didn't fix the gaping hole that had been left in my heart, but it did bring a certain level of closure, a harsh understanding of why things had unfolded the way they did. And though the pain of losing Emily would never go away, knowing the truth gave me some semblance of peace, even if it was a peace built on tragedy. In the weeks that followed the attack, the emotional toll of the tragedy was something I had never imagined I would face. The aftermath wasn't just about the physical wounds Emily had endured, but the psychological scars that would remain long after the doctors had done all they could. Watching my daughter struggle with both her physical and emotional recovery was a daily reminder of how precious life truly is and how quickly everything can change. Physically, Emily's recovery was slow but steady. Her body, fragile from the trauma, had to heal, but the doctors were amazed at her resilience. She had always been strong, but this was a strength I hadn't seen before. The bullet had grazed her side, causing significant internal bleeding, but miraculously, she survived. She spent several days in the hospital, hooked up to machines, her body battered but determined to fight. There were moments when I feared the worst, but Emily refused to give in to the darkness. The pain from the wound was something she had to endure, but it was the emotional scars that proved more difficult to heal. As soon as Emily was stable enough to go home, she withdrew. She spent her days in her room, the curtains drawn, her eyes vacant and distant. She didn't speak much. She didn't cry. It was as if the weight of what had happened was too much for her to bear. I tried my best to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but she didn't respond. How do you explain to a child that her world has been shattered by an unimaginable act of violence, and that no matter what you say, you can't make it go away? It was heartbreaking to see her in so much pain, her spirit dimmed by an event that she couldn't possibly understand. I would sit by her side for hours, not knowing what to say or how to help. But I never left her. I stayed by her, hoping that my presence alone would bring some sense of comfort. We spent long hours together, talking about anything and everything, the things she loved, her dreams, the small things that made her smile. Slowly, she began to open up, just a little at a time. The breakthrough came one evening when Emily finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did she do it, Mom? Why did Karen hurt me?" Her eyes were full of confusion and fear, her innocence shattered by the cruel act of betrayal. I hadn't prepared for this moment. How do you explain to your child that someone they trusted could do something so monstrous? The answer, of course, was that I couldn't. There was no way to make sense of what had happened. All I could do was hold her and reassure her that it wasn't her fault, that nothing she had done could have caused Karen to hurt her. I told her that we would get through this together, and I would always be there to protect her. The emotional healing was much harder. It was hard for Emily to reconcile the woman she had once known as a friend with the woman who had attacked her. Karen had been a part of her life, a person who had once shown kindness. Now that memory was a lie, and the world she had known was forever altered. The trust Emily had in people had been shaken to its core. She was scared. She was withdrawn. She didn't know who to trust anymore, and that was the hardest part for both of us to navigate. But Emily, despite everything, was not broken. Her strength began to surface in small, quiet ways. She started to draw again, creating pictures of us together, of the things she loved, of places she wanted to visit. The art became a way for her to process her feelings, to express things she couldn't say out loud. She began to laugh again, albeit softly, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a glimmer of the old Emily, the bright, determined girl who refused to let anything define her. In those moments, I knew that she was healing. Slowly, piece by piece, she was putting herself back together. Her recovery, like her strength, was something I had underestimated. I was so proud of her, more than words could ever express. But it wasn't just her physical recovery that amazed me, it was her emotional resilience. The trauma she had endured would always be a part of her, but it didn't define her. She was still Emily, the girl who never gave up, who fought for what she believed in. But my journey as her mother was just as difficult. I had never imagined that I would face such a trial, and the weight of it was suffocating at times. I had to learn to navigate my grief while trying to help Emily through hers. There were days when I felt like I couldn't breathe, days when the sadness and anger felt like it would consume me whole. The pain of losing the life I thought we had, the life that had been ripped apart by Karen's actions, was unbearable. The injustice of it all left me angry, lost, and confused. At the same time, I had to remain strong for Emily. I had to be her rock, even when I felt like I was falling apart. There were days when I doubted my ability to be the parent she needed me to be. Was I doing enough? Was I saying the right things? But over time, I realized that being there, simply showing up, was enough. My love for her, my presence in her life, was the greatest healing tool I could offer. I also began to see a therapist to help process the overwhelming grief and rage that I felt. I had to learn how to deal with the emotional weight of the trauma, and it wasn't easy. There were many nights I spent crying, letting the sadness out, only to wake up the next day and face the reality of it all once again. In many ways, this tragedy changed me as a person and as a parent. I had always known the importance of resilience, but this event forced me to live it. I learned that love isn't always enough to protect those you care about from the world's cruelties. I learned that sometimes the things that happen are completely out of your control, and all you can do is try to pick up the pieces afterward. I learned that healing isn't linear, it's messy, it's painful, and sometimes it feels like it will never come. But it does. Slowly with time, it does. And while the scar of what happened will never go away, I began to understand that it doesn't define us. Emily and I would carry it with us, but it didn't mean we were broken. It meant we were survivors. We had been through the worst, and though the pain would never truly go away, we had each other. We would heal one day at a time. It's been months since the incident, and while we still have our moments of pain and fear, we've come a long way. Emily has started to trust again, to open up to others. I can see the light in her eyes once more, the spark that had been dimmed by Karen's betrayal. And as her mother, I can't help but feel an overwhelming sense of pride and gratitude. We've both been through hell, but we're still standing. And together, we will continue to heal. The aftermath of Emily's attack was nothing short of devastating, not just for her, but for everyone who loved her. As the weeks passed, it became clear that the pain we had experienced was only part of a much longer journey, a journey that would involve legal proceedings, a search for justice, and ultimately an attempt to rebuild our lives from the wreckage of that horrific night. The police investigation had uncovered the full extent of Karen's actions, and there was no doubt in anyone's mind that she had crossed a line that could never be undone. She was arrested the same night she fled from our home. The police had been quick to find her, as she had left a trail of evidence behind her. Not just physical evidence, but also digital footprints in her computer and journals that confirmed her obsession with Emily and her intentions to harm her. There was no question that Karen was guilty of what she had done, but the legal system would determine just how much justice she would face. The trial was a difficult experience for all of us. Sitting in that courtroom, listening to the details of what Karen had done was excruciating. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman who had slowly spiraled into madness, a woman whose obsession with our family had turned into an uncontrollable rage. Karen had planned the attack meticulously, as evidenced by her journals and the way she had staged the scene. She had gone to great lengths to hide her true nature, pretending to be a friend when in reality, she had been slowly unraveling in secret. The defense, however, tried to argue that Karen was suffering from a severe psychological breakdown, that she had been under extreme stress and had lost control of her actions. But there was no denying the coldness of her actions. The jury deliberated for several days, and in the end, the verdict was clear. Karen was found guilty of attempted murder and aggravated assault. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge took into account the premeditated nature of the crime, the emotional and psychological toll it had taken on Emily, and the fact that Karen had shown no remorse for what she had done. The sentence was a relief, but it was also a bittersweet moment. Justice had been served, but it did nothing to bring Emily back, to undo the damage Karen had caused. In the weeks that followed, we were left to deal with the aftermath in our own way. Emily had a lot to process, and as much as I wanted to shield her from the pain, I knew that she had to face it in her own time. The trial had been another traumatic experience for her, but she had been brave. She had testified about the events that had unfolded that night, her voice strong and unwavering despite the terror she had felt. It was a step toward healing for her, a way to reclaim her power after the violence she had suffered. As for me, I struggled to come to terms with the betrayal. Karen had once been someone I trusted, someone I had invited into our home, and now she was the person who had nearly destroyed everything I loved. I spent a lot of time reflecting on how I had allowed her to get so close, how I had missed the warning signs, and how I had failed to see the darkness that had been hiding just beneath the surface. The guilt I felt was overwhelming, but I had to remind myself that this wasn't my fault. No one could have predicted what Karen was capable of. It was her choices, her actions, that had led us down this path. The real work, however, was in rebuilding our lives. The emotional scars left by that night would never fade completely, but Emily and I were determined to move forward. We started therapy together, learning to navigate the complexities of grief and trauma. It was a slow process, one that required patience and understanding. There were days when Emily would regress, days when the fear would overwhelm her, and she would lock herself in her room. But we kept working through it. Little by little, she started to reclaim her sense of self. She would smile again, laugh at the silly jokes I told her, and find comfort in the small, everyday things that used to bring her joy. Our family was rebuilding piece by piece. Emily and I started going to the park again, taking walks and talking about everything and nothing at all. The simple act of walking together, side by side, became our new routine, our new normal. We had to learn to trust again, not just each other, but the world around us. We were more cautious, more aware of the people in our lives, but we were also more determined to make the most of the time we had together. There were moments when the pain still crept in, when the memories of that night resurfaced, when I would catch myself staring at the empty spaces in our home, wondering how we had gotten here. But then I would look at Emily, at the resilience in her eyes, and I would remember that we were still here. We had survived the worst, and we had come out the other side stronger, though scarred. We also leaned on our support system, the people who had been there for us throughout the entire ordeal. Friends and family rallied around us, offering their love and encouragement when we needed it most. It was a reminder that we were not alone, that the bonds we had forged with others were stronger than the hatred and betrayal we had experienced. Despite the darkness, there was light, and slowly we began to rebuild. We started setting new goals, making new plans for the future, even as we honored the past. Emily began to rediscover her love for art, drawing and painting again with the passion she had before the attack. Her artwork became her voice, a way to express herself in ways she couldn't with words. She began to take on new challenges, determined to live the life she had always dreamed of, no matter the obstacles. The healing process was far from over. There were still days when the pain felt too great to bear, when the trauma of that night threatened to consume us both. But we had learned that healing doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey, and some days it feels like 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But what mattered was that we were moving forward together. In the end, that was the resolution. Justice had been served, but the true healing had to come from within us. The pain would always be there, but we had the power to choose how we would move forward. We could let the tragedy define us, or we could rebuild, reclaiming our lives and our strength piece by piece. And that's what we chose to do. Emily and I had endured the worst, but we were still here. We were still a family. And that was something no one, not even Karen, could take from us. We would heal, and we would live. As I sit here reflecting on everything we've been through, it's hard to put into words the depth of emotion I carry with me every day. The pain of what happened, the way it forever altered the course of our lives, is something I wouldn't wish on anyone. But through it all, I've witnessed something truly extraordinary: the strength of my daughter, Emily. Her journey from that night to where she is now has been nothing short of miraculous. Despite the unimaginable trauma, Emily has shown resilience I never knew was possible. Her courage, her refusal to let this define her, has inspired me in ways I can never fully explain. The love she has for life, for her family, for the little moments that make us human. That's what truly matters. Through the darkness, she has shown me what it means to fight for hope, even when the world feels unbearably heavy. This experience has taught me some of the most valuable lessons of my life. The importance of love, the kind that holds us together when everything else falls apart. The significance of family, the people who stand by you when you're at your lowest, the ones who never give up. And most of all, the vital need to protect those we love, to cherish them, and to make sure they always feel safe in our presence. To anyone out there who has been through something similar, I want you to know that you are not alone. We are survivors, and our strength is found in the way we rise from the ashes of what we've endured. Together, we can heal. If you're watching this, I ask you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us your stories, your own journeys through hardship, and let us support each other. We need to talk about mental health, about the importance of safety, and about standing up for those who can't always protect themselves. Please subscribe, share this video, and help us raise awareness. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's continue to protect and love those who matter most. And remember, the strength we find in each other is what will carry us forward. Thank you for being here with us and for being part of this journey.